Welcome back to the Ideas Club's podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed our last episode on Black History Month, our special edition panel discussion. This podcast is also a special edition for Women's Week. We have partnered up with the Feminist Initiative of JFK to produce a panel consisting of 6 young women who talk about their experience of being a young woman at JFK in Berlin and reflecting on feminism. Hope you enjoy.
Good afternoon, I'm Daniel Lazar. It's my pleasure, it's my privilege to serve as the faculty advisor to the JFK Ideas Club. I'll be moderating the panel today on behalf of the Ideas Club and with respect to Ms. Cupp and the members of the Feminist Initiative. The Feminist Initiative was founded in 2017 to address feminist issues through action, through daily purpose-driven action. Today's Feminist Initiative action is to give young women a chance to share their stories and their perspectives. The Ideas organization was born out of the idea that in our times of crisis, in our age of anxiety, when democracy is fragile, when intolerance is increasingly tolerated, we have to intensify our efforts to create a space, a safe space, but a challenging space to discuss ideas and to celebrate diversity. Organized by Clara Lindemann, Ms. Cupp, and myself, today's panel speaks perfectly to the intersection of the core missions of Ideas and the Feminist Initiative. For today, we're going to grapple with the experiences of being a young woman at the Kennedy School and in the broader Berlin landscape. We have no real agenda other than to try to shed whatever light we can. So let's get to the first question. There's some controversy in our school, as well as in the broader society, about International Women's Day. I ask the panelists in turn, how do you guys feel about this new holiday, International Women's Day?
While I was originally a little bit skeptical at first, I think it is a good thing in the long run, just because I think Women's Day used to be something to celebrate women, and I feel like now it's turned into something to fight for equal rights, and that's something I'll stand behind. And I think it's a good day to have to kind of create awareness about the issue and the history behind the day and behind the issue of feminism and what that means to us as women and to men. And yeah, I think it's a good thing, and I'm happy that we're enacting it.
I think the controversy or the misconceptions that I had experienced didn't center around the fact that it was made a holiday, but more generally about celebrating International Women's Day. As you addressed, there seems to be this notion or this idea that it's about celebrating women. Often women are given red roses, and I feel like that isn't the right way to approach the day. It should be about raising awareness, about going out to protest, about informing individuals about the lack of gender parity we have in the world. And often I'm asked, well, why isn't there an International Men's Day? I think that's kind of besides the point. There is actually an International Men's Day. It's about promoting men as positive role models, which I think is great. But it's kind of similar to the idea of, criticizing Black Lives Matter and saying, well, don't all lives matter? Yes, but that's beside the point, because you need to address the issues that exist. And I think in this case, it's that women don't actually have the same rights as men.
I think International Women's Day is really good for younger girls, because I think younger people don't really know or aren't aware of the controversy surrounding the holiday. So for them, it just is solely a good thing. And I think that's one of the positive aspects of it.
Yeah, in addition to it being good for younger girls, my mom was really excited to wish my grandma a happy International Women's Day, because I think to my grandma probably means something else. Like that, there is true achievement. You see the strides that women have made since the 1930s when my grandma was born. But I think that it also gives a sense of achievement to women. And although, yes, to my grandma it does, to the women of today, I think there's still much to be done, and that's why I think it's sort of a phony holiday.
I think pretty much everything has been said, but I think additionally having a holiday, so also freeing women up to really have the opportunity to protest, to have the opportunity to really think about it, and just to embrace the opportunity to think about the reason we still have this holiday.
What I think has been interesting about this whole idea of making International Women's Day a holiday in Berlin is that the discussion has come up whether or not it's a good thing that it's been made a holiday, and through that discussion on radio and TV and at our school, it has become so much more of the center of the focus around this holiday instead of that it's just about the people who actually already are engaged in these ideas and already going to protest, but now it's actually including and involving a lot more people who might have not heard about it or thought about it in the same way that they did before.
So the Ideas Group surveyed 143 students in grades 10 through 12. The sample was pretty evenly spread among the 3 grades and among male and female students. Our survey found that 57% of grades 10 through 12 students, 57%, identify as feminists. Are you a feminist, and do you think that everybody should be?
I would call myself a feminist. I've always, I guess, fought for also my right to be a leader and be engaged in civic activities no matter what kind of area that is. My 2 majors in school are 2 sciences, and to me, I don't think anyone should not identify as a feminist. The only controversy that I've seen around it has been brought up by other people surrounding me about the fact that feminism only fights for women, and feminism has this kind of bad, I guess, bad notion to it because it isn't as inclusive as maybe some people see it. But as any movement that challenges ideas and norms that have been such a part of Western culture for a really long time, it's gonna have some controversy to it. But I definitely think that feminism fights for the rights of both men and women, and also people who might not identify as either of those genders. So, yeah.
I absolutely do identify as a feminist. I think that there has been issues with the movement and that intersectionality needs to be increased, but I do still believe that everyone should be a feminist and we can improve the movement together, we can expand the movement together, but I think the core value is definitely one worth sharing.
Yeah, I definitely am a feminist as well. I think if you can kind of take away from feminist being an insult and kind of embrace it as a label working towards something good, I would hope that that can happen more. And I mean, not everybody is going to be a feminist. I think there are people that can't relate to that, and that's unfortunate. But those that are just ignorant or don't know what it means to be a feminist, I would hope that they can kind of educate themselves and realize that it's something to be proud of, and hopefully that would spread.
Can I push into that? There are people in this room who fancy themselves educated, and you're telling they should educate themselves. There are people in this room, but in particular there are men in this room who don't identify as feminists. What do you guys have to say to men who don't and maybe won't identify as such?
Well, I think it's actually not about the word, but I think that rejecting the term is symptomatic of the general perception of feminism. Why should there be so much opposition to just a word that is like any other in the dictionary? In the end, it's about what you do for gender equality, and maybe have a look at a dictionary, look up the word feminist. It's not usually defined as just fighting for women's rights. I listened to an interesting podcast where it was said that maybe a mistake in the past has been that feminists were trying to be too inclusive, and now some conservative individuals who are against freedom of choice, so freedom to abort, are identifying as feminists or using feminist language to appeal to more women in light of the post #MeToo era. I think that's a really interesting point, but in the end, I think that if you stand for gender equality, you should identify as a feminist.
I think saying that men who don't identify as feminists don't identify as feminists because of ignorance is kind of a generalization, and I think some men don't identify as feminists because they genuinely don't see women as equal.
I think when it comes to feminism, if you don't necessarily need to be a feminist to stand up to stand up for women and men when someone is being sexist, and to generally just fight for equality or advocate for it. And I'll go to these protests and I'll partake in like the I am a feminist chants, but that's not to say I think I've actively sought out checking off the boxes which make me a feminist. I think, again, if you're open-minded and you're fighting for what is right, then you are a feminist. And by identifying as that, you don't need to, because I think the concept of being a feminist, it sort of makes in-groups and out-groups, where it's us versus them. And I think if that were, abolished, then it would just be fighting for equality. And to fight for equality, you need to fight for women's rights.
You guys have brought up naturally in a discussion like this sexism a couple of times. According to our survey of the student body, when sexism is defined as prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination on the basis of sex, 90% of students in grades 10 through 12 sometimes or frequently hear JFK students make sexist comments or jokes. So what are our expectations, and where do we draw our lines when it comes to these types of so-called jokes?
I mean, I think with anything, it really just depends on the context of the joke, and if it's meant as serious or if it's meant as, really is a joke. And I think that depends on where you are. Like in school, I think we're getting past the point where someone telling a sexist joke is legitimate grounds to believe that that there's a stereotype behind it and that women should be thought less of. And I also think it's very independent how you perceive it. If I hear a sexist joke, I don't take it seriously, and maybe I'll even laugh along. And I don't think the right move is to take the humor out of everything, because I think that makes everything a bit more of a taboo.
I think I'm kind of a hypocrite for saying this, because me with my friends, we make sexist jokes all the time, also with my guy friends and girlfriends. But I think that sexist jokes kind of normalize the idea of sexism. But that's not to say that all sexist jokes are that terrible. But I think especially in the media, they have way worse of an effect than in private conversation, because if you're a small child and you see sexist jokes, you don't even perceive them as sexist, you just perceive them as true, because if you're young, that's not a distinction that you can make.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I do have an exception. I think when you're joking about sexual harassment or rape, there is definitely a line, just don't do it, because you can never be too careful. You never know what a woman or a man has been through, and if you are making those jokes, they can really affect the person and bring back a lot of unwanted memories. And it is a very personal struggle, so respect that and be aware that isn't a laughing matter.
Okay, so I personally have struggled with this, and like the others, I do partake in some of these jokes, but I have asked myself to what level this is an internalization of the culture, or how much we're just propagating a culture that makes light of the issues women face. So while I don't think we should move towards a humorless society, I think we need to make sure that we're thinking about where the root of these problems are, that we need to have conversations if we feel there is real cause for concern of what nature these jokes have.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. The only thing that I can add is that the person making the joke, the context of it has a lot to do with how people perceive it, and also whether or not, I guess you can say, it's right for that person to make a joke, or they have the legitimacy. So for example, I think it's more acceptable for women to make jokes about, to make kind of sexist jokes, because in that sense, it's them laughing off or trying to deal with the things that they've been confronted with. But for people to make the jokes who maybe are in the situation of actually of hurting someone with it, that I think is where you kind of have to draw the line. But again, it's kind of a difficult topic, and the best thing that you can do about it is actually discuss it with the people around you. And if you're making those kind of jokes, I guess know who you're talking to and know who you're addressing. And if that's going to have a hurtful effect, then you shouldn't be doing it.
So I'd like to remind the audience that we will have some Q&A coming up, so please consider the questions you might want to ask the panel. I want to refer back to some of the data that we've collected and get your opinion on it. Our data claims, and I'm going to drop 3 data points. Only 60% of students believe that boys and girls have equal opportunities for academic success at JFK. 75% of us believe that JFK provides equal opportunity for boys and girls to succeed academically. 57% believe that girls behave more appropriately than boys. Only 2% believe that boys behave more appropriately than girls. Can you guys, bearing in mind that data and all of your experiences, walk us through the gender dynamics of the JFK classroom? And before you do, if I could just remind you guys that all of the whispering that happens in the audience gets picked up, and it's, well, let's say unwelcome. So walk us through the gender dynamics in the JFK classroom.
Personally, I've never really experienced any negative connotations with gender in the classroom, except for one experience in 8th grade when a teacher told me I should smile and I shouldn't frown all the time. And he never said this to any of the guys in my class. And he said it in front of the whole class, so I felt embarrassed at first and then angry, but I didn't say anything, of course, or not of course, but I didn't. And I think that generally at JFK, teachers are quite objective. I'd maybe even say that girls have more of an advantage just because of the stereotypes surrounding them, and the idea that they are more mature at an earlier age and maybe taken more seriously. I wouldn't say to a large extent, but I could see how one could make that argument.
I also think that JFKS provides a pretty equal or a pretty good environment for individuals or students of all genders to succeed, but I do think that the curriculum is not entirely addressing the issues it should be, whether it be a lack of information in sex ed class, for instance, around consent, but I think we'll talk about that a bit later, or whether it be that we rarely ever read any works written by women in German class, and we never even address it, or we've never even learned about women's rights in my German history class. I think that those areas are lacking, and they might actually affect the way in which students perceive the world and maybe contribute to them believing that actually there is no more gender inequality.
I definitely agree with what's been said, that there is kind of a lack of education around these kind of topics, and this is why I'm so grateful that we're having this discussion and that we've been talking about it more, and that the Ideas Club and Feminist Initiative has brought this more into the foreground. I do think that at JFKS, the classroom does not just define your degree of success and your degree of what you can contribute to the community. There are so many great clubs and kind of programs at the school that facilitate leadership for both genders. And for example, I've taken part in the MUN program at our school for a really long time, and it's been amazing to see the student leadership team that plays such a great role in facilitating the conferences in the program be led by some incredible women, and to have that kind of the opportunity to see women in those positions has just kind of normalized it for me, and I've had those aspirations, and I've been able to have the thought that, I could be me in those positions in the future, or it could be in university or something like that. So having the opportunity to do that has really increased kind of the idea that it's normal to have women in those positions, and I think that's also an incredible thing.
One thing that I think the data is showing is that there is a difference in the maturity levels of boys and girls. And I think we can see in a lot of classes, at least a lot of the classes that I've been in, is that it's a clear distinction between like the boys and the girls. And there isn't a lot of crossover between them. And I think it's kind of sad, because then you don't have like that male or female influences often, at least like that personal friend relationship. And I also think a notable thing is there are a lot of guy teachers. I don't have a single female teacher, and I think that's, that's perpetuating the role that like the male is the leader. And I don't have female teachers. I don't really know the different teaching styles that they would have, which is kind of sad because I'm being given the male perspective.
Yeah, I was actually reflecting about this, and I didn't notice until I think I was thinking about this panel. I have 2 female teachers, but I see them 6 out of, I think, 35 or 36 hours a week. Not 100% sure, but that's not quite right. None of my AP classes are taught by women, which is also a little bit concerning, because at the end, if you don't see someone like you in those positions, it will eventually subconsciously affect how you see your ability to have those same positions. So I think that's a little sad, and it's not been this big, there's not been this large of a disparity for years, so I don't know what happened in 11th grade that we have so little female teachers. But yeah, also to clear divisions in the classroom. I think it's really improved in 11th grade, that I think there's a lot more community and there's a lot more equality. But in my AP United States history classroom, for example, front row is girls, back rows are guys, and that kind of, the fact that we don't mix a lot is concerning.
I designed it that way. Can you guys, can two or three of you talk about this, and then we'll get into our final question. So 2 more questions for the panel. Women's Week and Women's Day sort of intersects with a growing discussion around what's loosely being called #MeToo. Can you guys talk a little bit about sexual harassment in the hallways or the classrooms of the Kennedy School?
I think it's real. I know it's real, and I think it happens a lot more than people probably perceive it. It is a personal struggle, and it is something that every individual deals with in private, but it is a huge thing to kind of cope with, especially while you're a student. And I think whether that be rape or being catcalled on the street, most women have experienced that, and it does affect you in some way. And just to be careful and be mindful, not only aware, but mindful of what you're saying, and how you're treating women, and communicating with them about that topic is really important.
Yeah, I think it's a lot, like it's a very big problem that a lot of, especially boys, don't realize how big of a problem it is. Like in my experience, when I try to talk to boys about anything like that, they say that it's like not really a thing anymore. But when I talk to girls, it's like every girl that I've talked to has had an experience from like something small or like something really big and traumatizing. And I think it's important for boys to know that it is a big problem.
As it relates to sexual harassment in Berlin, in general, I mean, catcalling is of course an issue, especially like in the summer months when you're wearing, like shorts and tank tops. It's gross. You don't let it get to your head as much, but you still do feel this like internal pressure to like cover up. But I also know that in clubs, one of my friends, she was going to a club and she was like basically like thrown down the stairs because she was being pushy, or she was just trying to like get her opinion known to like a very mean bouncer. And also within the club, you can't go by yourself. Like you can't go without a man because then you're suddenly seen as available.
I think a problem that I've experienced more abroad, actually, when I go to France, is that when my friends and I are catcalled or men start talking to us in an uncomfortable way, women often feel very hesitant to say no because we're never taught that. We're always taught to be kind to others. We're taught to be open and conversational. And I think we should teach girls to say no.
I'd just like to add one more quick thing. This whole idea of a catcall being a compliment is absolutely ridiculous, and also the idea that women often don't feel like they have the power to say no or have the power to talk back to people. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is that it's incredibly scary to be catcalled, because the idea of actually saying no or trying to defend yourself comes with the idea of what the consequence will be. Because we are brought up with stories of women being raped at colleges and left behind a dumpster, or women being, catcalled, or someone flirting with them, and then the man actually doing something very physical or harmful to them, whether it's stabbing them or beating them up or something like that. And so even for someone like myself who has been doing a martial art for the past 6 years, I do not feel comfortable defending myself in that kind of a situation. And I think if men maybe understood that, and I think also some women who maybe haven't had the same experiences understood that it's not the idea that we are unable to say no, it's the idea of the consequence that comes after that that is terrifying in those kind of situations.
And thank you guys for being willing to talk about it. I'm going to ask you one more question, and after I do, I'm going to ask those of you who have questions to line up along the stairs. Here's the question. Like a lot of your classmates came to this discussion, pretty thoughtful on these matters, and they're complicated. Others haven't. So there's a varying range of experiences in the audience. What's the one thing you really want your audience here to carefully consider when it comes to issues that young women face at JFK in Berlin? So, which is to say, your parting thoughts before we turn to questions, each in turn.
So I guess one of the things that is important to realize is that you don't have to go out of your way or make a huge change to your life to actually contribute a lot. I guess this idea kind of goes with any movement or any change you'd like to make on a larger scale, is that the smallest contributions or the smallest changes and actions that we do as individuals can have a large impact on other people. So just thinking about that, and maybe just reflect something that you've done that might have contributed to this problem and changing that, and just being open and aware of this. It doesn't have to be a huge burden in your life to actually improve the lives of all of these women. Yeah.
I don't have that much to say, but I would just like to remind you guys that we're not quite there yet. And I know that although the school isn't completely sheltered, there's places in the world that have it a lot worse than us. And I think once we leave the school, we might be faced with harsh realities. So I ask you to, if you are a feminist, just kind of bring that out into the world and to keep thinking about it.
Yeah, and to think about, if you're not a feminist, why that is, and whether that is something you can get over or you can read about or think about and ask about. Have conversations with your friends, even if it seems like that won't ever happen or that's uncool. Don't be afraid to ask or talk about it with your teachers or your classes. I think being aware and mindful, to spread that, you really need to communicate with people and share your stories or your beliefs, and try to come to some kind of common ground.
Whilst this is a panel about women's experiences, I want you to remember that gender equality will benefit us all. It's not just women who are boxed into cages by stereotypes. Men are affected by this, transgender people, non-binary individuals. And I think that if we rid ourselves of these very clear ideas of what it means to be female, what it means to be male, if we just let people be themselves, we'll all be so much freer.
I think this is for everyone. It's really important to acknowledge that everybody has gendered bias, and that I think the first step to creating a more open and tolerant society is to acknowledge that and to actively censor yourself when you think something that's obviously inspired by some kind of prejudice that you have.
I think we should all strive to be as open-minded as possible, and that means not discriminating against any personality. And I think there would be a lot less inequality if we weren't considering gender in our interactions. And I think we should be open to everyone for honestly a more meaningful life and fun.
Okay, so thank you guys for being panelists and for talking to us today. I have a question. How do you guys think being a daughter, so parenting, has influenced like your development as a woman? We were talking about how like boys are sometimes seen as more immature, but there's arguably another side when you're a daughter, how you're brought up and what restrictions you might have.
I think daughters are often raised differently and seen as different, having different traits that make them useful in certain ways to the family. And I think most girls can probably see themselves in this idea that they carry more of the emotional labor in the family, and they have to be there for the other people in their family emotionally, whereas men and sons are more closed off.
I'd also agree that it does still have an effect on people. I know my parents I have an older brother, are definitely like try to be fair and are very open-minded in that regard and haven't tried to fit us into any gender rules specifically with their intent in parenting. But I do recognize that in some things where I get comments on the clothes that I wear or the way that if I do makeup, then my dad will comment on that. And those kind of things that are my choice and my expression that I do because I want to are commented on, and those things don't occur with my male sibling. So and in a way, I always try and justify that it's my choice and I'm not doing it because society expects it of me or because society has told me that, you know, this is maybe how you should dress, that I have a choice in that. But I always feel this kind of underlying shame that I should consider what other people think of me when I choose what I wear, which in and of itself is just not what you should be thinking of, but society still kind of makes it part of the discussion, which I think it shouldn't be anymore.
So I actually had a different question, but in light of the previous questioner, I would like to ask a different one. So what panelist number 6 just said, building off of that and parenting and being a daughter, how do you think that women and girls being victimized in society is being on the street, they're more likely to experience daily violence because they're women? How do you think parents should deal with that? And how do you think that if this whole thing about being stricter with girls, like what you said with the makeup or with the clothes or with going out, in what way, or how parents can ensure that their children are safe as a daughter because of girls being more victimized?
So I do think that parents should teach all of their children to be careful, but I think that if we change the emphasis from how women should act in society to be safe to how men should act in society to ensure the safety of women and to be respectful, then we wouldn't have this issue anymore. That it shouldn't be mothers sitting down their daughters and teaching them how to dress and how to act and how to use their keys when they're coming home if someone attacks them, to how men should be respectful. Then I think that would make a huge change.
And also not just teaching males not to be violent towards women and to be respectful. I think that sort of, that implies that you consider that men would be violent otherwise, but also teaching males that they can be helpful bystanders, and if they witness someone else be violent towards a female or anyone else, they should act.
As somebody who's always felt safe at JFK, and who's heard stories about how much worse it is at other schools, I just wanted to ask if you guys also consider JFK well on its way to be completely equal, or if there's still a lot of work we need to do.
I think JFK is definitely ahead of the game, at least compared to other Berlin schools. But I don't think there's only so much a school can do, and it's the students that are the problem. Or part of the problem.
I agree. I think that we've all been raised with these sexist social norms, and we are all thus affected by them, even if we may, or many of us may believe in gender equality. And I think the comments that I often receive when I speak about my activism, when I post something on social media, by other students, for instance, that question my feminism, that say that we've already achieved gender equality, that men are more discriminated against than women, so on and so forth. They just attest to how we are not entirely equal yet.
The topic of people identifying as feminists came up earlier, and I was wondering how you would respond to people who say they don't identify as feminist because they say it's been taken care of in the West.
Okay, well, if I understand your question correctly, I think I feel with those people because although I go to these protests to show my support, I largely think that the work has been done for me in regards to women empowerment. And so although I don't blame them for not identifying as feminists, I think they should still try their hardest to advocate for equality when the time comes that it's necessary.
Well, I think that until everyone is equal everywhere in the world, there's still a reason to have feminism, and just because you don't seem to be experiencing any problems, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take any action. Furthermore, we have not achieved gender equality in the West either. There are discriminatory practices. Just look at the ratio of females to males in parliament and positions of power in the industry. Look at the gender wage gap. I think that those factors all attest to that there's not gender equality.
Yeah, I definitely don't think there's gender equality yet. We just came out of the Me Too movement, which showed that men are still systematically using power to take control of women or force women into things. So that's an indicator that we're not there yet. So I would just prompt some questions.
My question, sorry, my question relates to the whole issue of abortion, and I want to ask whether you guys, as you've identified as feminists, whether you believe that the freedom of choice and women's empowerment are both connected and they rely on each other.
I would say that they're definitely connected because a big part of the discussion around the freedom of choice and abortion is whether or not the woman has the freedom to make that choice. And I can't speak explicitly very well on this topic because it's not something that has affected me. And even though we've had discussions about this in class and other forums, there are a lot more people that have more kind of information on it. My 2 cents would be that if, especially in cases where you're restricting the access to this kind of these facilities, for example, in the US, you're limiting people who have been unjustly made to carry a child, their ability to get rid of it, or where it might actually severely affect their health or their well-being, or they're not in the financial or economical or social position to have a child. I think just by saying that you're saving the life of a being isn't enough to warrant shutting down abortion centers and limiting that access for women, especially if you take the example of the US. If you're basing an entire country on the notions of freedom and choice, then you need to make that available to everyone in those kind of situations, so yeah.
How do you think being trans, either like a trans woman or a trans man or non-binary, would affect or play into these different issues that you've brought up?
I think whatever you identify as, you should stand behind that movement. You are included in that. So if you identify as a woman, then you should be treated the exact same as if you're born a woman. I think there's no difference, and I think we're all fighting for the same thing, and there's power in that, and I'd hope that it doesn't really matter as long as you are kind of going out and protesting and trying to make a change for women. in the world.
Well, yeah, I think feminism just by definition should be intersectional, but I also think that celebrating differences and acknowledging differences is important. I think Audre Lorde wrote like a whole essay about how to say that we are all the same is like an injustice to people who are different, and there is, I think, a difference in experience between trans women and women, but that does not mean that trans women aren't women. It just means that the same way that like Black people experience the world differently than white people, but like those differences I think are very important and should be, I think, explored rather than ignored.
Do you think that you're doing justice to, the whole notions of like inclusivity and intersectionality when you have a panel made up completely of 6 cis white females?
No.
Yeah, I also agree with panelists too. I think that in order to give a more full picture of what women's experiences are like, we should have just a lot more diversity here. And I think that's something that could be improved upon in the future.
I would also say that we don't necessarily have a great representation of everyone who's affected by this. We're also all either 11th or 12th graders, and that doesn't really include the perspective of anyone older or younger than us and their different views on the topic. But the fact of the matter is that we are actually having this discussion in this panel, and that you are all listening to us, and hopefully other people through the podcast will as well. And that if we establish this as a realm for discussion and a realm for having these conversations, then we are able to, in the future, improve upon our diversity and the stuff that we are able to contribute to the movement, and also to just facilitating learning and conversation.
So all but one of you at the beginning said that you identify as feminist, and that if people fight for equality, they are as well, and if boys aren't, it's because they're uneducated. But I find that false in the sense that there is, outside of our bubble that is the school, there's like a negative connotation still to the word feminist. And I'm wondering if, first of all, if you agree with me and what you can do to combat that.
I think I touched upon this earlier. There's definitely a negative connotation, and as I mentioned, I think it's symptomatic of just the perception of the movement as a whole. Why should there be so much controversy around just a term when you don't fight about whether or not someone should be called a teacher, or if someone is, I don't know, something else that you can look up in a dictionary. And I think that there's some limit to who should identify as a feminist. If someone is just believes in female supremacy or in male supremacy, and they choose to identify as a feminist, I don't think that's accurate, but I think that we should more embrace the term.
So look, most of our audience today you guys are coming from your history and your literature classes, and I guess we all encourage you as you march through the canon of literature and history. We hope that you'll put today's discussion into a broader context. I think all reasonable, decent people here know how far women have come, even in my short lifetime. But we also hope that you appreciate that the gains that women have made are a result of dialogues like these. So if I may, can we please first offer a round of applause for the organizers. Thanks to Clara and Ms. Cup for organizing. Thank you guys for engaging with us. We hope that the perspectives that you heard today you bring back to your classrooms and to your dinner tables. Have a great day, guys.